Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Oh, it's officially already afternoon. Here anyways. Good morning to Mark, who's still in the morning in the Guam. Very happy to have everyone here in the room for this panel, which will focus on youth in Latin America, insights on artificial intelligence and age assurance mechanisms. So I am Marcela Machudu. I'll be moderating the session in which we will have Mark Smith, who's with us online from the Center for Information Policy Leadership. Thank you, Mark, for being here, or virtually here anyway. Also, Jorge Lima from the Autoridade Nacional de Proteção de Dados from Brazil, the Brazilian Data Protection Authority. Mercedes from CPDP in Buenos Aires. Thank you very much, Mercedes, for being here with us. And last but not least, Lee Matheson from the Future Privacy Forum. And the goal of this session is to offer some more insight into the adoption of age assurance mechanisms and discuss those mechanisms, those based in AR or not, and how they can impact minors in online environments, right? So we will do a panel that is entirely based on Q&A. And the idea is to have you guys from the audience also jump in at the end of the panel for 10 to 15 minutes in which you guys can ask questions as well. But we have some questions that we already prepared and we would like to discuss before that. But I mean, let's try to do it in a way that we can get as much engagement and participation as possible, because that's usually the best outcomes from panels come from this kind of interaction. So again, thanks everyone for being here, and without further ado, let's get started. So the first question that we wanted to tackle was regarding the consensus that age assurance mechanisms and age verification mechanisms are important. Like there's no arguing on that. But there is far less consensus on what exactly is the right balance between more data collection and more effectiveness of those mechanisms, right? Because it is usually understood that once you collect more data from minors, the mechanisms themselves can become more robust. So I would like to first ask to Mark, what you believe regulators should require from companies when they're actually evaluating age verification mechanisms in that sense.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hope everyone can hear me there. My name is Mark Smith. Yes, all good. Is that a thumb up? You're very tiny on my screen. But hopefully my head is not too big there, and I don't look like the great and powerful Oz. But my name is Mark Smith. I'm with the Center for Information Policy Leadership, which is a think and do tank based in Washington, where I sit, and London and Brussels. We are inside the law firm of Hunt and Andrews Kurth, but we're separate and apart from the law practice. We address policy issues and we try to build bridges between regulators and industry. I know we have a great relationship with the ANDP, and really excited to be here. Just sorry that I can't be there in person, but thank you for inviting us to participate in this. So you asked questions, and let me see if I can just quickly share my screen, because I want to give a little background to the issue that we're talking today. Here's the share button. Okay, let me know if that goes live.
It did.
Can you see it? Okay, great. So, and I believe these slides will be available after the webinar or after the conference, because I wanted to share a few documents here. We have QR codes for you to download them. But if in case you don't get your phone out quick enough, these should be made available after the fact. So back in 2021, CIPL launched a special global project on children's privacy. And in October 2022, we published this paper on international issues and compliance challenges. And among the issues identified for further exploration was the use of age assurance and its impact on children's privacy, but safety as well. I mean, safety is a huge issue in this space too. And in light of that, together with the We Protect Global Alliance, we started hosting a series of roundtables on age assurance technologies to examine the issue a little more deeply and provide an environment for fostering solutions. So these roundtables have taken place over the past year. These are all held under Chatham House rule so that we can actually facilitate open discussion. And we published a number of takeaways from these roundtables, and this is still ongoing. So if anybody in that room is interested in being part of these roundtables, my contact information is on the last slide of this deck, so feel free to reach out and we can include you on the list. But related to that, in the US, we did an overview of the age verification laws that were being enacted in the US and sought to focus on, what are the technical, practical, and legal challenges affecting stakeholders and really society more broadly. And we followed up with a CIPL-only roundtable held in San Francisco last year that addressed these challenges. And you can access our takeaways there. So where are we now? Let me stop the share. So let me just focus on where we are now. Our most recent roundtable, which was held last month in Brussels, produced a draft discussion paper that's not yet public, but it sets forth a framework to support an interoperable approach to age assurance. Unfortunately, we have not yet prepared the takeaways from that event, but they will be coming out hopefully by the end of the summer, but I can share with you a little bit to bring you up to date. So by way of background, companies like Google and Apple have developed credential management APIs that empower users to share identity signals from their preferred stored credential to relying parties. And these APIs now offer the promise of a standardized privacy-preserving mechanism for age assurance that could be used by app developers and website providers to offer flexible age-appropriate experiences to their users. But of course, there's always a wrinkle, and the wrinkle in this case is the efficacy of these developments hinge on the development of a broader interoperable framework. These APIs can only operate seamlessly if they have, after stakeholders in the marketplace can define shared principles, technical standards, and level of assurance. So for this to occur, kind of a long way to your question, we need industry and regulators to get together, and regulators not just in the privacy space, but also in the content space, to encourage these developments by aligning on practical, flexible guidance that first of all holds companies who are ultimately responsible for implementing age assurance responsible for implementing age assurance that is proportionate to whatever risks they present, and they know what risks are presented by their services. We need guidance that recognizes when companies exercise good faith efforts to address age assurance, that they'd be supported, they'd be offered adequate protection without forcing companies to adopt new procedures. We would also need to balance the need to protect user privacy with the need to provide robust age signals to support age-appropriate experiences. And we also need to incentivize cross-industry standards through the recognition of developing and other standards that promote consistency. And we also need to spur adoption and integration of official digital credentials and related apps by supporting integration with developing industry approaches to expand the usage and promote interoperable methods that support the ecosystem. So what does our draft framework set out? It sets out four overall sections. One on the framework's objectives. We're looking for a framework that has a common taxonomy, that has technical standardization, and pathways for cross-jurisdictional recognition. We also are addressing what our foundational principles should be. So we believe it should be risk-based and proportionate. We want to foster privacy by design principles, as well as transparency and user autonomy. The third principle on interoperability standards, we need to have a degree of platform neutrality and special technical specifications to address those issues. And lastly, and probably most importantly, we need a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the different players in this space. Now, the discussion from June talked about many emerging themes. Some of them were, definitely embracing this risk-based approach that whatever measures are implemented need to be proportionate to the assessed risks. There was great support for privacy by design and data minimization principles, such as zero knowledge proofs to ensure that only the necessary age signal, that somebody is over 18, for example, is shared, so that you're not talking about leaking other types of personal information or tracking other activity. One of the key takeaways was that age assurance has to be viewed not just as a restriction, restricting children from certain contact, but also an enabler of protection. So it can be used and it should be understood as a tool to help understand user demographics and effectively apply appropriate protections, such as turning off personalized ads for minors if that's the case, or ensuring that default safety settings are applied if a user is identified as being one under the age of 18. There's also service provider responsibility, that the regulated service provider is the one who remains ultimately responsible for ensuring the effective protection of children, and that the appropriate or the ultimate goal of this framework is to create age-appropriate digital experiences that comply with the regulations, rather than just capturing a user's age. Of course, there are many challenges we face moving forward, and it's the ongoing patchwork of existing national laws with differing age limits and differing age assurance requirements. There's, again, the whole question of liability, who is responsible for what. There was even a discussion of perhaps a little over-reliance on parents, as critical as parents are in this space. Some felt that they can't be the sole arbiters of online safety because, you see examples of parents who are more permissive with underage children, on platforms that they're meant to not to access. So, and I know we're going to be touching on this a bit, but also just the implications of AI introducing new challenges, such as if a user is in fact a human, because that's definitely an issue here. So one of the next steps possible, and specifically in the regulatory context, would be the adoption of regulatory sandbox to encourage pilot projects and use sandbox to test some of these solutions in the practical settings. I probably went on a little too long, but I turn it back over to you and see what further discussion can develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I would like Mercedes to jump in on this same issue to share with us, what she believes that should be required from companies when age assurance mechanisms are.
Thank you, Mercedes. And thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Mark. I'm really aligned with all what Mark says. I bring my opinion on what I believe or what I see. I'm not only a professor at CETIS in Buenos Aires, but also I work in a law firm in Buenos Aires, and we address this issue a lot. And the first challenge we see with regulators and companies, like we're in the middle. So we believe that it's really important, this is what Mark was saying about roundtables, getting to conversations and getting to know in real time, in reality, what is needed and what can be really addressed by companies or by anybody online. And also, an important thing I believe is necessary also is to hear parents and children, like how they use the internet, parents, how they believe they can control, because I don't believe this is only a legal matter, but also we need to address this as a social claim. And I believe, as you said, that we all agree that age assurance is important and we need to address this, but we need to take care of this in a comprehensive way, let's say, with both parents, companies, legal matters, and also the minors. So I think that's really important also. And another thing I prepared, and I agree with Mark, is that we need like risk approach based mechanisms. It's not one size fits all, and we do that. We prepare the law, we enact it, and let's do what we can with that, because I think that most of the times causes the contrary effect. Like as we cannot effectively apply that law, maybe it's not applied at all, and maybe children are less protected. So I think that communication and the participation of all actors involved are really important there, and addressing more like how can we balance with being able to control or have age assurance and not collecting a lot of data. I think risk-based approach must be there also, like depending on the type of app or the type of product or the type of service minors are accessing to, should depend on what age assurance method we use. For example, if we think about when we were preparing this panel, we were talking about an example of video game for adolescents between 13 or 15, depending on the country. In that case, we need some age assurance, but it's not the same as a platform that brings, I don't know, adult content or something that kids are banned to access. So that in that cases, I believe we need to like be more risk approach and understand what is the need in that specific case, and not implement like, okay, facial recognition for everybody. No, there is where we have to make the proportionate decision between personal data and protecting kids and minors.
Perfect, Mercedes. Thank you very much. And now asking both Lillian and Georgie to jump in, I think in most Latin American jurisdictions, or if not most, certainly in several, there's always this discussion about the difference. When we're talking about minors, we're actually talking about children on the one side and teenagers, adolescents on the other side, right? And we have different obligations in most legislation regarding those groups. So do you believe that this difference between children and adolescents should entail different debates regarding age verification itself? For example, you know, if we're talking about, as Mercedes was just saying, like a platform that is effectively banned for children, should we have mechanisms that are, you know, stricter when we're dealing with that? Or should we try to, also for the purposes of this being, you know, regulatory efforts, the more we fragment it, the harder it tends to be to implement, right? So what should we do? Like, how should we approach this topic? George, if you could start.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcela, especially for the invitation to participate in this panel. I was very glad. I'm very glad to be here. To start, I think I do believe that the distinction between children and adolescents is important when we're talking about age assurance mechanisms. And I think that this discussion must related to a risk approach, risk approach method, like Mercedes said, because like you also said, we cannot treat adolescents and children in the same way. Basically, I'd like to point out two main questions on that. First of all, because children and adolescents, they are not the same in their cognitive, emotional, and social development. So young children, they don't have the same capacity that teenagers have. For example, to comprehend the implications of accessing harmful content or inappropriate age content for them that teenagers might have. Also, children, they don't have the same maturity to understand terms of service. For example, even adults have difficulties to understand these terms, but when it comes to data protection, for example, children, they cannot have the same understanding like teenagers to understand the complexities and the consequences of consent to a certain procedure, for example. So if our goal is to prevent children from accessing harmful or age-inappropriate content, stricter and more reliable age assurance mechanisms are necessary. At the same time, a slightly different approach might be acceptable when you're talking about older teenagers, for example, because they have more autonomy and understanding of on how to navigate in the digital environment. But also, this differentiation is not a question only of reason. It's not to be reasonable, but it's also grounded in Brazilian law. For example, the Statute of Child and of the Child and Adolescents, they clearly states a difference between a child and adolescent. So, and this differentiation has informs the level of protection that is required when we're talking about not only the protection in the digital environment, but also in civil life. So that's why I firmly believe that we must separate establish stricter and reliable age mechanisms when we're talking about children. And we can use a more liberal approach when we're talking about older adolescents, because that's what's in our law as well. It's not only reasonable, but it's their law. And also, I'd like to point out that last year, Brazil has adopted the Convention Resolution number 245, that recognize the best interest of children and adolescents, which is a principle of our constitution, but also strictly requires from platforms to prevent children from accessing content incompatible with their age. So, and in this spirit, I believe that the federal government is looking for alternatives and looking and taking measures in order to adapt our regulation to that principles. But it's not enough to call for restricted age verification. We must do it responsibly. And when I say that, I'm referring on the balance that we might establish between by setting up stricter age assurance mechanisms that tend to use more to collect more data from children, and including sensitive data like biometrics and behavioral content, for example, with the rights to privacy and data protection. So I believe on that. Sorry guys, I didn't bring my notes because my memory is not that good. So I believe that to mitigate these risks, they are right there. Systems should be designed according to privacy by design and privacy by default principles. And here I'd like to point out 5 measures that I consider to be of the most importance to balance those legitimate interests. For example, first, minimizing data collection to what is strictly necessary to verify age. to verify age. Second, limiting data retention and secondary use. So when we're talking about biometrics and behavioral analysis, the prevention of the secondary use of this data is very important to uphold privacy rights for the children. Third, implementing robust security measures to protect stored data. Earlier in the other panel, they were talking about cybersecurity and the importance that we have. And here in Brazil, I think we are still very behind of the best practices regarding to safety measures. So this is very important. First, providing transparency and accountability in data processing. And this is important not only for the parents, but also for the members. So we have to, companies and data controllers in general, they have to adapt the transparency, the norms for transparency and accountability in a way that minors can understand it. Otherwise, it becomes a formal requirement and not a material one. And last but not least, I think that's very important to consider privacy enhancing technologies like zero knowledge proofs that verify, for example, age buffers without disclosing more unnecessary personal details of the children, right? So I believe that by adopting privacy by design, controllers can design age assurance systems that protect young users. At the same time, they uphold the privacy and data protection rights. But for us, I'd like to be just stating that I believe that effective age assurance is not simply about blocking access, because the digital environment is important for children. It's important for them a young age to know how to navigate this environment and take advantage, for example, for education, for culture, of course, and so this is important. So age assurance mechanisms for me is more about building a digital environment that is safer, more inclusive, and respectful of children's rights. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. I'm gonna directly give the word to Lee so that he can jump in on that.
Sure, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel here today. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I do think that there are some fundamental things that I fundamentally agree with my co-panelists on. The necessity of approaching this concept from a risk-based standpoint, I think actually ties pretty directly into the second question that we're addressing as to whether or not both the law and practice should make a distinction between children and adolescents. I think that's one of the risk-based components of an effective age assurance system. On the one hand, you have a question of what kind of content are you trying to control access to. And this isn't necessarily just about prohibiting access to things like, adult content and those services, or even online retail entities that offer age-controlled purchase opportunities for, like, I don't know, alcohol, tobacco, whatever. But also, the other end of that is ensuring what my co-panelists have discussed is an appropriate and valuable digital experience for youths and adolescents of the right age. So if you can do age assurance, at least in the broader bands of different age groups, you can really improve the way that all sorts of different levels of maturity are able to interact with online services. And so it's like there's this content-based question, and then there's also the risk-based question on the basis of the child user that you're talking about. As my co-panelists have all mentioned, a 5-year-old and a 17-year-old are not identical in their risk profile when they're interacting with online services, whether that's retailers or content delivery, or even the risk posed by interacting with information sources that might deal with violence or other things that like a young child might find scary, but a teenager might need to access for school. So it's a complex question. Without simply reiterating the points that my fellow panelist here just made, I do think that looking at the degrees of age assurance that are possible and assessing them against these two elements of risk, we can at least start to come up with some best practices. I mean, like a lot of the status quo prior to the last few years has just been declaration. The lowest and easiest bar to meet, you go to the user, they hit a service, they're required to declare their age, there's no follow-up to determine whether or not that's accurate, there's no follow-up to determine whether or not, you know, the user that's declaring birth date is even an actual person, let alone you know, a child. Like on the complete flip side of that bell curve, hard verification, where a user has to maybe provide a government ID and a real-time photograph, where some sort of biometric technology is used to match that against the identification that's provided. And obviously, as all of my fellow panelists have raised, this introduces privacy concerns in terms of real-time identity being linked to granular online activity, perhaps in ways where, at least to the user, it's not visible whether or not there is what information retention policies exist around this kind of verification, or what third parties are being trusted to provide these sorts of services. And then in the middle, you have what I would say are, I guess, probably generally newer technologies, age estimation tools, where you have zero trust, like proof of at least age range on the basis of a photograph that makes a determination about maybe a user's age range without further trying to do a one-to-many identification system or anything like that. And I think I would go back to the first question that this panel was asked, in that clearly, like, a huge area in terms of figuring out how to do this practically is putting not just industry, not just platform operators, not just service operators, not just regulators in their individual silos, but getting a unity of purpose and a unity of guidance in the market, so that there can be implementation of the effective, and I'd say, Jorge, the 5 measures that you recommended are also extremely consistent with traditional principles of data protection that are not unique to this age assurance space. I mean, data minimization in terms of the minimization of the collection and transmission of data to exactly the age information that's necessary to do risk-based appropriate verification. That goes all the way back to the OECD principles. And similarly, you know, appropriately limiting secondary uses to preserve trust in the marketplace and preserve trust in the public in these technologies, I think is another appropriate. And it's not it's not a novel concept, but it is a novel application to this new area. So I think, keeping in mind that there is both this sort of X and Y axis of risk-based approaches, it's worth remembering that a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not going to be the most friction-free solution. That was what Mercedes was getting at, in that there needs to be a market recognition and a regulatory recognition of the availability of and differing appropriateness of these different kind of approaches. And I know we have a whole second set of questions, so I think at that point, let's, so that we can at least get Mark in before he has to bounce, which I know is also a concern. So.
Thankfully. Yeah, so I wanted to give the word to Mark, also emphasizing one of the points that Lee brought in his answer. So, like, by far the most used mechanism for age assurance today is self-declaration, right? So, you know, someone says that they're X, Y, or Z, and that's what you have for verification. So Mark, do you think that there are scenarios in which this mechanism is sufficient, and maybe scenarios in which it isn't sufficient?
yeah, let me try and rate. Did I lower my hand? Okay. Yeah, because I wanted to jump in on a few of the comments that my co-panelists have mentioned. But yeah, to answer your question, you know, why does it get such a bad rap, right? The whole self-declaration thing, because it's easy to lie, right? So if you take away, and getting back to the risk-based approach, if the risk is very low and there's no incentive for anyone to lie, then there could be a place for age declaration. But you know, whether I can dream up what that scenario looks like, I'm not about to try that. But it shouldn't be taken off the table, because there may be places that are low risk and low incentive to lie, that that sort of methodology should remain available. But I wanted to touch base on the last question that you had raised about the different age ranges. As many in the room probably know, that there are, I think, 3 open consultations now globally on children's privacy issues writ large. Canada and Australia and Colorado had just closed their request for initial rulemaking guidance. But I think it was Australia in particular was asking questions about age ranges, and you know, everything from 0 to 5 to 16 to 17, and like breaking it down into 5 different age groups, which I think was reflected in the UK age appropriate design code. And just from an operational standard, it's great to understand that children have different needs and different stages of development that need to be recognized. But when regulators try to get in the space, get into the weeds a little too deeply, and try to micromanage, oh, you know, this is what preschool agers need, and this is what early elementary grades need, that's not the best approach. It's best for industry to do their own assessments, again, back to that risk assessment, of what it is they're trying to do, what their service is trying to reach, what market they're trying to reach, and have the flexibility to use whatever measures they think would be appropriate, whether they're age assurance or other measures. So I hope that answers your question, and maybe goes back to the question beforehand.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. And Georgie, would you like to try and answer that one as well?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, I personally have some difficulties to see self-declaration as an age assurance mechanism in itself, because just like Mark said, it's very easy to circumvent this method. So you don't have a proper barrier to prevent a child or a teenager to lie about their age. I'm a father of a 16-year-old son, and I know that when honesty is in contradiction with his primary interest, with his first interest, well, honesty tends to be put aside, so to do something. But I think that the most problem with self-declaration is that it's fundamentally flawed, because in general, the user, he already knows the limit of age to access a service. When you download a platform in your app store, you see that the minimum wage to access. So it's very easy. Even when it's very easy to circumvent and have access to the platform. And even when companies they try to argue that they are using neutral age gates, for example, by no, you don't have to say that you are 18 years old or not, you have to put your birthday. This is very ineffective. And this method, it's unreliable because you don't have validation. You cannot, you don't validate the age that is being on the system. You don't have checks and anything else, so it's completely unreliable, and it's also ineffective because we know that children, they are accessing these platforms, and like I said in my last answer, children and adolescents, they sometimes they don't have the maturity to understand the implications of accessing inappropriate service. So we don't, so it's very unfair also to put all the accountability to the minors in order to have to decide if whether they access or not that content. So despite in addition to being unreliable, it's ineffective, and it has ethical problems as well, because the company is putting all the responsibility on the shoulder of minors. And this also makes that company, they don't take the necessary measures, for example, to implement better age assurance mechanisms. But I believe the self-declaration, well, alone, I think it's insufficient. But I think that it can play a role in a multi-layered or risk-based approach. So if you use self-declaration to reinforce other techniques, and we are talking about, for example, medium risk services, that might be used for another tool in order to verify the information that the user has given to you. But this technique cannot be used to replace these other age assurance mechanisms, especially when we're talking about medium and higher risks systems and environments.
Perfect. Thank you very much, George. And still talking a little bit more about the mechanisms themselves, right? So we are ever more discussing adding AI and AI related mechanisms to this mix, precisely to sort of like, make the mechanisms more effective or more trustworthy, etc. But it's common, as all of you already mentioned, that using that technology can, in some circumstances, especially we're talking about, for example, facial recognition, lead to more data collection. And in some instances, more data collection from the very people that we're trying to collect less data from and protect, which are children, right? And to some extent, it's like the riskier the platform is, the riskier the service. In theory, the more you would like to prevent children from having access to it. So maybe if you have to collect more data for that precise purpose of not having that person that is a minor, that is a child, to see the platform, etc., maybe that would be justified. So I would like to have a little bit more, insight from our city, especially on what do you see guardrails? Like we were all here saying like, okay, this is risk-based, right? So it doesn't make sense to just put one rule above everything. Do you think that there are, principles that we could use for ensuring that when AI or facial recognition is used, it really does make sense?
Thank you. Yes, I think like we need to first put in the table what are we addressing and what we want to protect. Okay, minors, but of what? And beginning from there, we can know, okay, if I want to protect them from high-risk platforms or high-risk content, or I want them not to be subject to profiles for ads, I don't know. Well, I think there is the beginning point. So we have to understand what we want to protect and what we want to do. After that, it's like a risk assessment, I would say. And then we're going to address with specific mitigation measures, such as, for example, not storing that personal data. Okay, we have facial recognition, but once we are safe and we know the minor is, I don't know, over 16 or under 13, I don't know what, the platform or the specific processing takes, we erase that data and don't use it for anything else. And while we were talking, I was thinking in Argentina, RENAPER, which is a governmental entity in charge of having all IDs and documents, passports, all individuals' data regarding identification, has a specific agreement with companies which use their data to for age verification, not age verification, but individuals verification. Like I say I'm Mercedes, and RENAPER says yes, this is Mercedes. And within that agreement, RENAPER tell companies that use that service not to store the personal data. So that might be a good practice. So I can use an external entity, governmental entity that has more responsibilities and go by the laws, we can say, to assure if this individual is a minor or not, if he or she is who he says she is, and you don't have to store that data. So that might be a good practice or a good mitigation risk. Also, but I think this is for all AI processing, like be sure no biases and not to store data for longer, not to use data for other purposes. But I think specifically for age assurance and identification, that would be a good measure. A part of all data protection principles and everything we address here, we have to do or we have to implement.
Thank you, Mercedes and Lee. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think I have some thoughts on the comments made by all three of my fellow panelists. I'll start with Mercedes. I think you're getting at the question of interoperability for age verification options. I mean, there have been a number of jurisdictions that have experimented with, having some sort of government offered digital identity service in the United States. I know one of the primary ones is Louisiana, that has a new digital ID service that is translated into a wallet that can increasingly interact with online service and information providers. And there are other jurisdictions around the world that are pursuing similar ideas. I do think that the main risk and the pushback that you run into with those technologies is, I don't think it's entirely unfounded when you have, free speech advocates and folks in similar spaces coming and saying, wait a minute, okay, so if you have a no retention policy on behalf of the service provider, what about on behalf of the government? If you're creating a permanent digital record of everything every adult citizen accesses in the name of protecting children from accessing harmful content, is there a separate risk that's being created there? Even if that risk is just what in the US legal tradition would be called a chilling effect, like having people be unwilling to do things that they would normally do, whether it's retail, shopping, or whatever you're doing, because there is a record established that's permanent, that is maybe opaque. So I think there's, as part of exploring those standards and those options, certainly having like a public policy conversation so that people know, what the rules are around what needs to be provided for these kinds of digital identities, what the rules are around what records are kept and where and who has access to them and why. That's a very important part of having public buy-in to the goal, which is of course to prevent harmful access of content that shouldn't happen by child users. I don't have a perfect solution to this problem, and I think that all of us being here and all of the events that Mark described, are all about the sort of status quo of declarative age assurance clearly being unacceptable in the current market. So there needs to be some kind of different. I also think there was, I think there's an interesting question of for George, what you were getting at with like putting the responsibility on child users, putting the responsibility on parents for declarative systems being unfair. And we also see that sort of normative issue come up in other data protection contexts like consent fatigue, or like it's now over a decade old, but there's sort of a famous Carnegie Mellon study just about privacy policies in terms of service, where like if everybody read everything that they agreed to nominally in the consent framework, you'd have to spend like 16 40-hour weeks a year reading all of the documentation. And so, you know, if you import that into either a declarative model where the responsibility is both on the users and the parents to honestly disclose what their ages are, and then maybe the platforms to take remedial action if they become aware somehow of a violation, you know, that's insufficient. But, you know, whether the options are a third party or government administered digital ID that integrates across platforms, or whether responsibility is best, you know, where in the tech stack should responsibility for age assurance sit? Should you have some sort of age verified account for app stores? Should you have an age verified account for services that provide access to other things, you know, via newsfeed or a recommendation of purchase? Or I think it's important to have industry and civil society and regulators in the same room, sort of collectively hashing out where the responsibility should sit. And I don't know that just letting, I'm sensitive to what Mark said about it's not like the more granular you try to make the rules from the top down, the harder it is to get actual compliance and buy-in from both the platforms and from users, because it's hard. But at the same time, if you leave the responsibility only in the hands of the platforms to decide what the appropriate risk is for users accessing their content, I mean, there are incentives that push back against doing anything other than what costs the least amount of money. So I guess with the if you want to sum up my remarks, things complicated. But I think it's important that we figure out an option that meets the risks that are increasingly obvious in the modern online ecosystem, but retains buy-in from, I mean, most importantly, the public users, that this is the option that is going to protect the most users without the greatest number of negative externalities. That's, I guess, where I put that.
Sorry, Marcela, can I?
Sure.
Yes, I agree with you, but I think there is no magical solution. Like, we need to understand that every solution will have like a side risk or something that we are not so comfortable with. So maybe we can, and these discussions, I think that help. So maybe we can, all the actors think that what is the less intrusive or what causes the less harm to minors and privacy and governmental control. I don't know, but I think there is no, and I agree with you, that there is no one magical solution or one thing that would be coming to save the day. We have like in every solution, we have to like give a little bit of our rights or our privacy, because if not, it's impossible. But we might have to be offline, and that's not a good solution either.
Guys,
Yeah,
go ahead, Mark.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow up on that. Yes, it's a multi-stakeholder problem, which is in search of a multi-stakeholder solution. Again, it's not going to be one solution, but various solutions depending on the context. But definitely some of the included among the stakeholders that should be at the table are definitely children, as well as parents and guardians, because that's obviously where a lot of the input is coming from on the legislative side. That's why a lot of these laws are being passed from constituents, parents and children looking for greater protections. So yes, it's quite a complex problem, and we need to get together to draft some options for solutions.
I do have a brief thought on that in terms of practicality, just in terms of some of the things that I've read about recently that, you know, beyond whether, like, sometimes you see this issue presented as a binary between these declarative age assurance functions that aren't terribly protective, or the ones that seem very invasive is the wrong word, but requiring lots of information. You know, their full verification with maybe a biometric, you know, follow up to the presentation of a government ID. But some of these third-party vendors, you know, maybe there are options for the privacy enhancing technologies of like the least amount of information being transmitted on an industry and government recognized standardized basis, like basically like an age assurance API that's maintained from a state-based digital law. Third party, I think there are options to explore there. If consensus can be reached beyond like the two extremes that are often presented in this space.
Guys, so George, I don't know if you want to jump in on because now I would like to open the floor to questions. We have about like 12 minutes, I think, maybe a little bit more. So yeah, I will put the mic there. If you can say your name, that'd be great. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sarah, great panel. I have a question. Like, there was a case recently, I think it was like a year ago, when this child was like interacting with a chatbot and ended up taking his life. I don't know if you guys see that. My question is, to what extent do we have power to test? Let's assume that models are being tested for that specific age range and it fails. To how much extent of power do we have to actually stop them from pursuing, like, we've seen, like, for example, in China, when they had their exams, they stopped the whole GPT system. So governments have the ability to do that. What are we doing in terms of moving towards that for that specific age range? What is being done right now? And to what extent can we actually stop big tech from allowing people in that age range to use their models? Because it's getting really bad. Like, just for context, what happened was, I'm not sure if you guys know about this case, but there was a child having a chat with a chatbot, and he really thought it was her friend. And then at some point he was like, I want to kill myself so I can come and be with you. And then she was like, I'll be waiting for you. So he ended up taking his life. And his mother was with the company, but they couldn't do anything because big tech, as you know, can't come for them. So what is being done right now?
Do you want to like one of the questions?
Oh, yeah, sorry. My bad.
Hi, Pablo Palazzi from Buenos Aires, Argentina, San Andres University. A great panel. I enjoy listening to everybody. And I want to ask you about the Australian law. I don't know if you mentioned it because I arrived a bit late, but this law that I haven't read the law, but I know that in Australia there's a law that says that kids cannot get into social networks until a certain age. So my question is, what do you think of that law? Is that the best solution or not? And what will happen if you are a kid, you're 21, 18, and suddenly you get to the social network without being before? Isn't that worse because they will not be prepared to interact with people or not? And I don't know. What question?
Any more questions, guys? Okay, so maybe we can answer those two and see if we have time for wants to start.
Let's start first, please. To address the question on the kid on internet, we are now participating with our law firm with the Pro Bono Association in Buenos Aires. And we are now participating in a specific case where the prosecutor of the city of Buenos Aires, together with OCEDIC, that is an association for cybersecurity data protection, they are doing trainings and educational panels, not only for kids, but also parents and trainers in social clubs. So that doesn't address the whole problem, but I think that education and getting to know what are the kids are doing, and also educate them on how to interact with internet, how they can do, what they have to be careful of, on what language or what people. That would be like a first step. This specific program is for bullying and grooming online. So you hear the kids in the school or in clubs, or also the parents. What we see many times that parents doesn't know how to interact with kids while they are online. So maybe it's not that nobody cares, but nobody knows how to address the real problem. I don't know, yesterday we were talking about this, and if you see the series Adolescence, there is very clear when they start to investigate, they don't even know what the kids are doing or what one emoji means. So I don't know. I don't agree with the fact that we need to ban kids from some kind of technology or platforms or apps. Instead, we need to teach them and accompany them on how to use it and be there for them. Not only as regulators can do little there, I think. So that's why I think it's really important. The school, parents, or pairs también also. So I think that would be like a starting solution on how we can, because all this is very new for all of us, and more for kids that are not aware of what really is really happening. So I think that teaching them is like a good first start.
I can maybe speak briefly to Pablo's question about the Australian one.
Before you talk, so I'd like to address this question about the models, the AI models as well, because well, just Mercedes said, we have this cultural problem. For example, all of this technology is very new, and it's very difficult for parents nowadays to address this kind of problems. But besides that, I think from the governmental point of view, I think that's very important for us to regulate the ethical use of AI. For example, to establish what is ethical, what is not. I mean, in terms of the results of this model may generate, for example, if they have the tendency to generate harm content or harmful results for the people that are using it, and especially we must to set up the responsibilities. Who is responsible for harmful results when you're engaging with this kind of technology? So this is important, and I think that this must be in a regulation in the law, so we can act on that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, first of all, with the answers my colleagues here gave to the first question. Your question regarding, so for everyone watching this, Pablo was asking about relatively recent amendments to the Online Safety Act in Australia, which, among other things, prohibited children below the age of 16 from creating accounts on age-restricted platforms. Currently, work is ongoing for what implementation of that will look like. I would say, I guess specifically the American experience of that is sort of, it's not an absolute prohibition, but there's significant, under or over 13 legal differences imposed by the CAPA, our federal law dealing with children in the online space. So I think the big question around how this e-safety process is going to work for this prohibition is going to come out to be what is the standard that's imposed on platform operators to ensure that prohibited users aren't creating accounts on platforms. I don't know that there's like a public answer to that specifically yet, what the standard that will be imposed on all operators of basically large social media platforms to ensure that future users and that existing users comply with the new rules. But I certainly think that the folks making those decisions are probably confronting a lot of the same issues that we're talking about today on this panel. And that they'll be one of the first major global jurisdictions to, because of legislative deadlines, make some policy choices about how that's going to be implemented.
Thanks. Mark, do you want to jump in on any of those questions?
Yeah, I wanted to highlight what Mercedes was saying about the importance of digital literacy. We teach a lot of things to our kids as they're growing up and making sure that what we're teaching them is age appropriate. And since we're living in this digital age now, they need to understand what the risks are that are out there. And it really, school systems and homeschooling parents and anybody raising a child should be looking to educate them as to what the risks are. Government agencies could be able to put out some more guidance. I know a lot of them already do that, but pushing what the risks are so that children can enter into the online space well equipped and not naive to be sucked into to potentially dangerous situations.
Great. I don't know if there are any more questions from the audience. If not, I don't think we really have the time. So I'll just ask for our panelists to do some final comments. And I will leave one piece of idea to guide those final comments if I can. So I think the conclusion here is like, this is very complicated, which, yeah, it is. But something has to be done. There's also consensus and something having to be done. But that what has to be done, it has to be somewhat risk-based, right? And I think that from my experience, especially as a lawyer, I see that companies right now are in a place in which there's so much consensus that something has to be done, that they're just kind of begging people to say, then what do you want me to do? Like, it's so bad, and I'm getting so much, fire on that it's better for you to tell me whatever it is that you want me to do, I'll just do it. As long as you say that it's like enough, right? Because as Mercedes was saying, like there's, miniseries, Netflix, just a lot of discussion in the public sphere about this. So my provocation to you guys is, do you think we can come up with like at least some base rules by, I don't know, the end of the year that should probably be applied in like, let's limit it to Latin American jurisdictions that, if everybody sort of incorporates that, we would be on a safer scenario, both for minors, be them children or adolescents, and on the side of companies and regulators as well, to kind of know like, okay, this is what we have. We're going to start to ask for these kinds of things. Do you think that's feasible? Do you think it's, something that's going to happen? And again, thank you all for being here, guys. Do you want to start, Lee?
Sure. I guess I'll just revisit, in closing, I think, one of the remarks I made briefly earlier, in that there is great potential in emerging digital ID products to be a significant part of this solution from like a specific and technical capacity. Now, whether or not this is third-party service providers, as we see in most recently in the news this week, I believe, the Reddit, the online news platform, started doing age assurance in the UK through a third-party provider that they seem to think satisfies the requirements of the Children's Online Safety Act there. And whether it's a third-party commercial entity or a different, maybe state-run, digital identity service, that might be a space where we can find consensus and also interoperability.
I agree with you, and I also wanted to say that I think it's feasible, but we don't have like become crazy, because many times we or countries regulate from desperation. Like, we need to address this. Okay, this law. Okay, and I think that it's not useful, and many times it takes like the opposite effect, and nobody finally gets protected. So I think like we can start from complying with data protection principles, and any processing relating to minors, like we need to be minimization, proportionality, go back to basics, I would say. Yes, and anytime we apply a age assurance method, it would be good to agree or getting in business with that company that would help us based on these data protection principles, like really from scratch. And that would be useful and would lead us not to become crazy and regulate anything at any costs.
I agree with you. And Marcela, I think I share the same sentiment that you have, that something must be done. But it seems that we as a society, government, industry, civil society, we didn't find a model or a scheme to establish. But in terms of deadlines, I'm from the government, so deadlines is a tricky question in government. But the Ministry of Justice has formed a committee to discuss the implementation of a methodology on age assurance mechanisms. And this committee is formed by representatives from different governmental agencies, civil society, and it's listening to members of the industry. So we are listening a lot of people from the industry to know what are the mechanisms that are already going on, and to see how they understand questions such as responsibility, who should establish these mechanisms, and what mechanisms are adequate and proportional to the risk. So I'm confident about that. I know that if this year that we have a deadline that I believe that to in this semester we should write a methodology or decide on a methodology in order to do that.
Great, thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I started this conversation talking about our age assurance multi-stakeholder roundtable. And we are actually doing something. We are looking to put together a framework for the global audience. And we are certainly welcome and willing to come to Brazil, potentially in the fall, to continue the discussion there and to share what we've already learned from stakeholders elsewhere in the world. And so I'm hopeful that this framework at least can get finalized in such a way that others can take a look at it and see, okay, could this work for this use case, for example? So heck, I'll be optimistic and put a deadline at the end of the year and say, yeah, we'll get something published and get that finished up.
Great, thank you. So at least we end on a hopeful note that we don't have answers quite yet, but we might soon. So again, thanks everybody for being here. And I guess we have lunch now, and Mark has a plane to catch. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.